All right, welcome to Smart Women Talking. It's the podcast that brings you unfiltered wisdom from women who have really lived it all. From the boardroom battles to raising families, no topic is off limits, and every conversation is guaranteed to be a treasure trove of insights, experiences, and heart-filled stories. I'm your host, Polly Meyer, with my fabulous co-host, Barbara Zulegger, and today we are talking about juggling work, juggling family, and self-care in today's nonstop world. And this is a topic that I am very passionate about, especially as it touches virtually every woman that I know in one way or another.
I think back to all the different phases that we all go through as women, wives and mothers and having careers and all the different things that we do, right? And it touches each of us and it can touch us in different ways, but it always comes back to that desire to have some harmony or some balance between trying to earn a living and trying to have a living, right? There's that balance of I always think of the old quote I heard, and I don't know where this all comes from, but you're supposed to work like you don't have a family
Hmm.
and parent like you don't have a career.
Oh, that sounds awful.
It does sound awful. And I mean, I feel blessed that for many, many years now, I've been able to work as an entrepreneur. So I've had a little more control over that. But also, as you know, as an entrepreneur, it means we also have that full responsibility of, you know, bringing in our own clients. We don't just
Mm.
show up and get a paycheck, which no job is easy. I don't mean that. But there are less hard stops for us as entrepreneurs. The office doesn't shut down.
Right. And we have worked in the business world. You and I have worked in the corporate world. We've raised our families. We have children who are raising their families. What are some of the biggest challenges do you see women facing today in trying to balance it all?
I think we all have a similar challenge. It depends on where you're at in your life,
Mm.
right? I mean, as we're recording this, it's May. And I remember when it dawned on me when my children were little that May was going to be arsenic month. You've heard people talk about arsenic hour at the end of the
Mhm.
workday, where you come home with your toddlers and they all need to eat and they all need mom and you're trying to take care of everything. May is like that with parenting, I think. It was for my family because you're ending all the end of school activities that are so busy and you want to be a part of all of that and you want your kids to be a part of that and they need this special outfit for this day and this little trinket for that day and all the summer stuff is already starting to ramp up and you've got weddings and graduations and it's not unusual for that also to be a heavy month at work, whether it's a corporate job or whether you're working in retail or whether you're trying to run your own show. It's just like you're always right on the edge of it's too much and then May comes and May is too much,
Mm. Oh,
right?
you're making me think back to when my kids were young, and I had two favorite times of the year. One was when summer started because I got to have my kids all summer. And my next favorite time of the year was September when all the kids went back to school. And so I
Yes.
had them all with me, but then, we all desperately needed more structure come
That
September.
I think structure is a big piece of that. And maybe
Yeah.
structure is a part of, we talk a little bit about, wanting the empowerment of being able to control our own lives, right? Uh, well, without some structure somewhere, everything becomes chaos,
Mm,
right?
I agree.
So we do loosen our structure in the summertime when you're raising kids. I think we all do, even when we're not raising children, right? I mean, I aim for less Friday hours in the office during the summer and so we do adjust that schedule based on the time of year. But it also, trying to have it all creates can create guilt and anxiety and a lack of empowerment, feeling like, well, I don't have any control over this. How do I just do it all? So I think it's really important that we talk about it and find ways that have worked for others. And sometimes I think one of the most important pieces here is to remember that we all experience it.
Right, because I feel like the landscape over the years has certainly evolved, but the core challenges, I feel like the core challenges remain. I mean, many women are in high pressure jobs where their demand to perform remains high. And add to that the societal expectations to be that primary caregiver at home. And it's no wonder that the stress levels are high. And I know that there are men listening who say, hey, I am right
Very
in there
true.
caregiver. And that is true. And I love that. My son is one of those that, is right in there with parenting. But we still, as women, do take on the brunt of the caregiving and the cooking and the cleaning in addition to the work that we do.
I
And
was actually looking at some statistics about that, and they still say that women take on about double the number, on average, the number
yeah,
of household, family hold chores, whether it's,
I bel I believe that.
managing schedules or childcare or, I do believe that it's a lot more expected, and men have definitely stepped up in a lot of ways to be active with all of that. But it's usually still led by the woman in the household.
And then our self-care, because of all of this, that often falls to the bottom of the list,
Mhm.
right? And it's then seen as more of a luxury rather than a necessity. And it's that feeling of being stretched too thin across every area of life, right?
Right.
And it's not just managing the logistics of work and family, it's also about dealing with the emotional labor. Women often carry the burden of ensuring that everyone's emotional well-being is okay. And that can be invisible, but it's very heavy work.
Well, I think for a lot of women, that goes well beyond our own households, right? It's our
Mm.
parents, it's our siblings, it's our
Oh, right.
friends, it's our clients, it's the people that we interact with on a regular basis that where, although probably most dads are very involved from that respect with their kids. I mean, I just saw a little reel the other day, and it was a mom and a dad going through Costco with a child in the cart, and their thought processes as they go through. Now, obviously, this was in lighthearted jest, but the woman's saying, "Okay, I got to stick to the list, and I got to get this, and oh, did I do that? And did I do this for the kids' school? And did we do this? And did we get to? Are we out of dog food?" And
Mm.
the husband's is saying, "Oh, I didn't know they sold tennis balls here. Maybe we need tennis balls." And I think, okay, so that's an extreme, but I do think there is some reality to that. There has been in my life, let me say that.
Yeah.
You know,
So how can we begin to manage these pressures more effectively?
I was doing some looking around for this kind of thing because most of my clients are women, and many
Mm.
of them are parents, even though many of us, our children are grown, but we still are kind of the leaders in the families. And I was thinking about what does it take? How can we take things we've learned about structure and about um, systems and processes within the business
Mhm.
and use them a little bit more in our home life?
Oh, that's
I
good.
actually found another article from the Family Business United, which is an online magazine about family business. And the things they suggested, there were top five. And I thought, man, these are all things that I teach every one of my business owners they need in their business. And yet
What are
we don't usually think about it for our families. It's being clear about separate and identifiable roles. Who does what,
oh, good.
right? Very simple. Like I cook dinner on Tuesday, Thursdays, and you do dishes or whatever that break might be. And that we don't always do that, I think, in our homes because there's so many things. That's when we get that, oh, I feel like I'm nagging. I shouldn't be asking that much. But we need to ask that if we want that kind of equal support within the household. So no, separate and identity roles. And then enhancing communication. Communication can disappear really fast when
Yeah.
there's, a million places to go and so many things to talk about, and you're not getting the time to actually see eye to eye maybe on things.
Hmm.
So being really intentional about communication.
Hmm.
Both you and I spend time talking to our clients about that. And yet I know in my family, although I've thought about it, I have to say it's never really been, okay, we're going to be intentional about scheduling time to talk.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
number three,
that could be as easy as uh, going with your partner on a walk and having like
absolutely.
a walking meeting or a walking conversation.
Yeah.
That
Or,
and even just moving your body and having that conversation keeps the conversation moving forward as well.
mhm. Or even just being intentional about that first 15 minutes in the morning, if that's
Oh,
when you and your spouse can connect, or, 15 minutes at night. Not maybe
yep.
right before bed, because you may leave some things unfinished that can keep you awake. But when
Hmm.
is the best time for you to at least touch base on the needs for the day? And I mean, even as simple as in business, I will have people do morning huddles, which is,
Hmm.
what was your win from yesterday? What are you working on today? And how can I support you?
Hmm.
What would
I
it
love it.
feel like if your partner or your parent or your child started off a conversation like that?
Hmm.
Might take some getting used to, but I think it would open up some communication.
Not only that, I feel like your partner or your child would feel cared for, valued, seen,
Hmm.
heard, all of those important things that are
Yes,
important to every human.
right, right. And all those things that we tend to, once they sit a while, we kind of avoid that conversation because, that's going to blow up and I don't have the energy for that today.
Right.
Yes, that can happen. I'm going to assume, for the sake of this conversation, that I am at least mostly normal in the things I experience, as do others. And I see it with my clients. I know you, well, there's two more, and then I have a question
Hmm.
for you. But
Hmm.
another one was planning succession early. Now, it sounds a little different in the family, but really it's about, what are we trying to get to, right? If right now this is how we have to be running things within our household, when and how can that look like a transition? So if one of the parents or one of the partners in the household has an over 50% of the load, is there a point where we're going to say, you know what, pretty soon these kids are all going to be this age, or we're going to be done fighting the bills and we're going to be able to do this? So what's that next stage look like for you, so you have something to look
Hmm.
forward to, and
Oh,
you know that
I
it's, because it's going to change. We know that, right? It always does. Being able
agree.
to think about it ahead of time. To me, it's how I read the planning succession early. Yes, I
Hmm.
know what we do in business, but also in our families, what's that next transition going to look like? Don't hurry it along. It'll come fast enough, but being
Hmm.
aware of it.
Hmm.
And then the fifth one I thought was the most important. And I hope, and I could be overly optimistic here, that the generations younger than us have done more of this than we did, but to have shared visions and values and talk about them.
Hmm.
Beyond, I want to get married, I want to have a family, I want to have a boat, those kind of things. What's that core that brought you together in the first place?
Yeah, I think that you're onto something with the values because having those shared values, it it helps make what you're doing more meaningful is and if someone has values that's completely different than yours, I feel that that's going to cause a lot of strife and a lot of tension in the relationship, which may also cause more stress and more anxiety and make all of what we're trying to do more difficult.
Mhm. And sometimes it's those little decisions, you start to kind of go a little bit apart from each other. And if you're not bringing it back together, that just gets bigger and bigger over time,
Hmm.
right? And when maybe you were on the same track, 10 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever that might be, are you today?
Hmm.
And it's much easier to make those small shifts. They talk about people growing together. And I think that's one of the ways they do it, is if you can keep your values in the same area, so you have the same priorities.
Hmm.
And I don't know that that always happens just because it happens. I think it takes more effort than we've been led to believe, at least
Hmm.
than I was led to believe within a family.
I
So
agree.
those are 5 steps that, if we can do some of that in our own personal lives, it may be helping us create more. I always use the word harmony, because it's
Hmm.
not about
I like harmony.
balance. I mean, it's not, oh, I had 8 hours at work today. I need 8 hours at home today. Wait, where do I get 8 hours for me? Oh yeah, that's the 4 hours I sleep and the 4 hours I do laundry, right?
Mm.
Um, it's more about sometimes business takes more, sometimes children take more, sometimes personal care takes more. But if we can
Yep.
bring it together and be aware of where that energy is going, it can create a really nice harmony too.
And I along those lines, and I'm going to swing back and do this full circle again with what you just shared. But it's also recognizing that doing everything, because you just talked about prioritizing, not that doing everything is not feasible, nor is it healthy, right?
Correct.
I think I've shared this with you before, Barb, that I listened to this podcast, and this guy was so remarkable, but he talked about how, we have about 4,000 weeks on this planet if we are
Hmm.
lucky enough to live into our 80s. And we always think that we have more time than, to do things than we actually do. So because we always think that we have more time, we add stuff on, we push things out, we
Right.
continue to push things
Hmm.
out. Our load then becomes heavier and heavier, and it adds to our stress and it builds our anxiety. And what I got from that podcast that I listened to that talked about our 4,000 weeks, it reminded me of that book by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly
Yes.
Effective People, where he talks about knowing what your big rocks are, right?
Hmm.
Your big rocks are those things that are most important to you, which also ties into your values, which you brought up just a few minutes ago. So knowing what your values are, knowing what is important to you, having that conversation with your partner or your kids or your employer that these are the things that are important to me. Knowing these are important because it helps you to prioritize then what you're going to work towards, what you will say yes to, but more importantly, it helps you to determine what you're going to say no to.
Hmm.
So that you can protect your time, you can protect your resources, you can protect your energy. So prioritizing what's important on any given day can help. And like you said, this is where I'm coming back full circle, is that some days work might be what takes precedence. You and I, Barb, we've worked on presentations, and we've put in 12-hour days getting ready for some of those
Right.
presentations. Other days it's going to be your child's school event, or if you have an adult child, they might need to talk with you to work something out, or they might just need a babysitter, right? Or sometimes it's your partner that needs extra time with you, or a parent. So that prioritization by knowing what's important to you and what your values are, that's really key, I would
It
say.
is. I think we have to be really intentional about that.
Mm.
It's because what seems urgent right now for most of us are by nature kind of givers, right? And
Mhm.
those of us in business know that what's the hottest fire? We've got to put that out, or everything else could be, in danger. And if that's how we're planning every day around, what's making the most noise today, we end up not necessarily in alignment with our true values. Where if we are aware of them and revisit them on a regular basis so that we remember, you know what, this was maybe my number one of five priorities when the kids were little. And now that they're growing, it's time for me to shift that. It's healthier for
Sure.
me and healthier for my adult children for that to shift a little bit. Now, what are my priorities? What's next for
Mhm.
me? They're all still in that top. I know I read an article in Time where they compared the top five values around the world, and you would expect to see some pretty big differences because there's some very different cultures than what
Sure.
we live in, the Midwest of the United States, right? And yet what
Mhm.
they found is that the majority of people had the same values. We just prioritized them a little bit differently.
Hmm.
Like maybe what was number one in this area was number five in this area, but they
Mhm.
were still in that top, important area.
Yeah.
And I found
And
that interesting that
yeah.
we're really not all that different if we're, paying attention to what really we need and what others need as well.
And with the prioritization and the execution of it, and
Mhm.
and staying within the realm of what can really be accomplished, what you really want to put your focus and effort and intention towards. I have a few strategies that I'd like to share about of things that I have used. And I have to say that technology can be a really great ally in this. So using digital tools to organize and delegate those tasks can really free up some of that mental space. So
Mhm.
for example, I use I use a few apps, and I use these apps every single day. The first one is Todoist and Habit Minder, and I've recently started using an app called Prio Planner. And I'm going to include links to all of these apps in the show notes in the event that somebody wants to check them out. But Todoist, Todoist, I have it on my desktop, on my laptop, and I also have it on my cell phone. And what this does is it gives me a space to jot down things that occur, that, float up for me. Oh, I need to write this down because this is something that I have to do. So it gives me a space to jot down things that are important for me for my personal life and my professional life. Now, Prio Planner is based on, Barbara, you familiar with the Eisenhower matrix where you determine what is urgent, what is important,
Yes.
what is
Hmm.
not important. So
Absolutely.
so Prio Planner is based on the Eisenhower matrix, and it helps me to determine how urgent and important my to-dos that I placed in my to-do list, how urgent and important that they are, so that I can either do them, I can schedule them, I can delegate them to someone else, or I can just say, you know what? This really isn't in alignment with my goals and my values right now or my priorities, so I can just say no to them altogether. And then my third app that I use is called Habit Minder. And what this does is it takes those things from my to-doist, the ones that I thought, okay, these are the ones that are really important that I need to stay on top of. They send me reminders on a regular basis so that I stay on top of them. So those are the apps that I find that help me to determine what's important, what I should do with that information once I've got it, and it helps me to stay on top of them. And that all helps me to mind my stress. In fact, one of those habits in my habit minder is it dings me 8 times a day to remind me to drink water. It dings me in the morning to remind me to meditate, which is a part of my self-care. It
Hmm.
dings me later in the evening to grab my guitar and play a song for about 5 minutes because that soothes my soul. So it's little things like that, as well as the big things that these apps all help me to stay aware of.
That's really what's so important when we talk about the overall balancing, right? Yep, there's work and there's ways we can improve on that. And yes, there's the big to-dos in our families and in our homes, but those little things about personal care and personal awareness, I think are the
Hmm.
first things that we lose. So
Yeah,
I love the idea of using an app to track those things. You're not going to usually forget your child at school, right? You're not going to forget that one big thing you promised a client, but you may realize, oh, I haven't taken any time to just be all week, and I'm feeling that.
yeah, and self-care, it should be a priority because it's what fuels us, right?
Yes.
And it's not just about spa days, although they are nice, but it's about getting enough
Our weeks
sleep.
in Costa Rica, and they are
Yes,
wonderful.
yes, I do think about Costa Rica all the time. But it is about getting enough sleep. It's about eating well. It's about staying active. It's about staying hydrated, taking time to mentally decompress. All of that. It's critical for maintaining our health and so that we can be present for both our work, our family, ourselves. And I'm wondering, Barb, what are some self-care strategies that you absolutely rely on? And when you're not practicing them, you can feel it, the absence of them.
One of the first things that comes to mind is going to seem a little strange to some.
Hmm.
I did it yesterday, which was a very stressful day for me.
Hmm.
I cut the grass.
Oh,
Now, let me
yes.
redirect that a little bit. I have a lot of land and I have a riding lawnmower. So I'm not saying I was out there shoving around this big, heavy lawnmower. But I put a book on or a podcast on my headset, and I go out into the sunshine and the fresh air for about
And the
an hour and a
smell of
half to
cut
two
grass.
hours. And I cut
Mm,
my grass, and then I can sit on the porch and see that cut grass. And for me, that just soothes my soul to have had
right.
that time outside and less likely to be interrupted because I'm on a
Hmm.
noisy machine. And
Hmm.
I'm usually listening to something that feeds me at that moment. It might be romance novel. It may be a serious podcast about business. It might be anything in between. But for me, that is something that I'm very excited this spring with the opportunity to cut grass a whole month earlier than I have recently because the weather has allowed that. And I know that, but that's just it. We find what works for us, right? Which
Yes,
is different than what works for somebody else, right?
right.
You're not going to find me go run a 5 mile marathon to feel better. Walks in the sunshine with the dog, absolutely. So
Mm,
those are some of the things that work for me. Um,
mm,
and caring for myself also sometimes is about caring for someone else, right? If
mm.
I can have, one of my grandchildren over or make something and drop it off at one of the kids' houses. I love to bake. So for me, that's a creative outlet. So
Mhm,
those things help me to feel like I'm getting in touch with me.
mhm. Yes. One of my self-care rituals is meditation.
Hmm.
If I go without meditation for too many days in a row, I start to feel cracks in my sense of well-being.
Hmm.
Any time that I can just breathe and meditate is a really good day for me. I also like to practice gratitude, especially when I start to feel that anxiety wind tighter and tighter.
Hmm.
If I can start practicing all that I'm grateful for, I thank the universe, I thank the creator for each individual in my life, and I name them, and I think sometimes all I can thank the universe for is the bed that I'm in and that I'm going to sleep in. That, but gratitude is I literally feel like the anxiety starts to unwind when I practice gratitude. I also self-mother. So my mother passed away. So I have to mother myself. So I tell myself and I do things for myself that I wish my mother could do for me. And
Give me an
sometimes that's just
example of that. What kind of things
uh,
do you do?
I visualize a mother's arms coming around me and giving me a
Hmm.
hug and telling me that things are going to be okay or that I've got this. Or I'll hear her voice and say, Polly, you need to drink some water, sweetheart. Or she'll say, Polly, get out of bed and go wash your face. You need to wash your face before you go to bed because you're going to feel so much better in the morning. It's a form of self-care.
Hmm.
And it's just these little tiny things
Yes.
that really hit the reset button. And I recently heard on another podcast, I wish I could remember what it was. In fact, it may have been TikTok, where of course I learned many of my things. Uh, is this one person said that our sympathetic nervous system, which gets us up, primed, ready to go, fight, flight, flee, freeze, uh, that gets triggered automatically. But our parasympathetic nervous system, which calms us and regulates us, that's like a button that we have to push to get it started.
Okay.
And so we have to determine and become aware of what are things that soothe us. Sometimes it's a hot cup of tea. What are some things
Yes.
that nurture us? What are some things that make us feel good and gravitate
Right.
towards those more? Then intentionally doing that, that primes and gets that parasympathetic
Hmm.
nervous system in play, and it
Yep.
helps to regulate us so we are not spending all of our time in anxiety and stress.
A couple of other things in addition to those. I also like meditation.
Mm,
Journaling is a big one for me.
mm,
And yoga. Yoga, especially in the evening. I do a very
yeah.
soothing, stretching kind of yoga in the evening. I'll do other, more a little more intense yoga during the day when I have time. But I love that evening way to wind down and just shut off the end of the day
Yes.
and allow myself to relax. And that is a big part for me of that self-care. And I know that I sleep better, so I wake up better, so my next day is better if I've taken the time, and it can be as little as 15 minutes. It doesn't have to be, of course,
Right.
15 minutes in, I'd like it to be an hour, but sometimes that's not realistic. So journaling in the morning, yoga at night, um, lots of sunshine if we can get outside and enjoy it,
Mhm.
regardless of the temperature, getting out
Mhm.
there as often as we can. I think those are all really important pieces. And I think it's self-care for a reason. It's very personal, right?
Mhm.
Like your guitar, which
Mhm.
is a wonderful tool. For me, it would be I play the radio, right?
Mhm.
Turning on just the right music for that moment. And I'm a lover of all kinds of music. So for me, it might be classical, it might be rock, it might be, 60s, it might be country. It depends upon
Sure.
how I'm feeling that day and what do I need.
Yep.
One of the things too that as I was looking at this topic for us today, was look at what do other countries around the world do?
Ooh,
And,
good.
we hear a lot about, Sweden and Finland and Denmark and having these high happiness quotients in their general population. I thought, so wonder what women do differently. And having a heritage of Swedish, I chose that country to look at. And the first that stood out to me is that they, on average, the people in Sweden work about 30% less hours
Hmm.
than the people in the United States do throughout the year. It's not expected that they work more hours than that. So that's a societal, cultural change for
Mhm.
their country.
Mhm.
And there were a number of key indicators that talked about, there's the more complete care for parents, both moms and dads, after a child is born. Children between the ages of 6 and 12, if they're homesick, their parents can take paid time off for that. And one of the other things I found interesting was there's less hierarchy in the business world in Sweden. There's
Hmm.
much more consensual and group decision making, right? And less climbing the ladder. So less competition.
So
And
it
I
sounds
think
like it's a whole cultural
it's
thing.
definitely a
They have
cultural thing.
different.
So that's why I think we have a little more challenge with it here because at least I do, and I'm not in a corporate setting, I'm just working my own business. But it's like, well, if I'm not getting ahead, if I'm not working harder, if I'm not doing more, I'm falling behind. I think that's very strong in our culture. And I think women have experienced that always to a point, but especially since the 80s, right? Big shoulder pads and big business for women kind of approach.
Yes, 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 we
Um,
did.
so I think we have that feeling that we have to always be striving. And if we can let go of some of that, and if we can find a way to, maybe the more each of us individually can do that, the more we can start to have that impact on society around us. To say,
Mm.
we don't have to be battling for every step on that ladder, right? We can, use our strengths and our talents and achieve what we want to achieve without it interfering with a better balance and harmony with our lives.
So it sounds like the key takeaway here then should be empowerment. That we need to empower women to feel okay about prioritizing their needs and speaking up. And as you say, it's about creating a culture, both at home and within our work,
Right. Hmm.
where that balance is not only possible, but it's actually supported as well.
And it's led by each of us. We
Yeah.
can't wait for our employer or our spouse or our neighbor to empower us. We have to take that empowerment and ask for what we need.
And if you ask for what you need and the answer is no, it's not a reflection on you, it's a reflection on the person or the company, whether they are
Mhm.
not able to or not willing to, but it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them. So to employers, recognize the productivity gains from a well-balanced employee. So I encourage employers offer flexible working arrangements wherever it's possible. And to families, share responsibilities. It's about teamwork. And everybody benefits when the load is shared.
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Well, Barb, this has been an enlightening discussion. I love discussing these critical issues with you. And I'm wondering, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
I think one of the other thing that comes to mind for me is it doesn't have to be just family or
Mm,
just people at work that we help support and that help support us. It's back to that it takes a village component, which I lived very strongly when I was raising children, and I see my children doing that with their children, and everybody benefits from it. So, if the neighbor next door needs a little extra support
mm.
in some way, or if somebody at work feels like they're struggling, reach out and ask them, how can I help you? That's
Yeah.
a piece of it too. And not in a way where we're all taking on more work from someone else, because that's a balance as well. But just letting people know they're not all alone.
I
Because
love
as we
that.
learn these techniques for ourselves, we want to share them with others.
So what I'm hearing is that balancing work, family, our village, self-care, it isn't a solo journey. So,
Absolutely.
so seek support, use the tools that are available, and more importantly, be kind to yourself out there. It's a balancing act, but it's one that's well worth it. Barb, thanks for such an insightful conversation.
Yes, this was a great conversation to have and to talk about all the different ways that we can improve our own lives and those around us as well.
Yeah. So everyone who checked in, thank you for listening. Smart Women Talking is the name of our podcast, and it is where women's wisdom doesn't whisper, but it speaks boldly and unapologetically. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Stop recording.